homes, especially if these were damaged by the quake. FIVOX is projecting aftershocks in the next 2 to 3 days, which will be dangerous for residents. Locals will have to stay at evacuation centers for the meantime, and the president assures there's enough food for them. President Marcos, meanwhile, is also concerned about the supply of water, power, and communications. They already requested emergency cell sites from telecommunication companies. When the chief executive was asked if there's enough budget for relief goods and repair of homes, he only answered, "We should be able to cover." In the end, the president says everything that can be done has been done and that they anticipated the needs of victims. President Marcos says they're continuously coordinating with local officials and sending rescue and relief teams on the ground, and that they will continue to report to the public based on the information they're getting from their teams in these provinces. Back to you, Pia.
Rex Remito there reporting from Malacanang. Intensity 6, or with shaking considered as very strong, was reported in Vigan City in Ilocos Sur. We now go above and beyond the headlines with the mayor of Vigan, Bonito Singson. He joins us via phone call. Good evening, Mayor. Welcome to Newsnight.
Good evening, Pia.
Yes. Sige po, Mayor, can you tell us what is happening right now there in your town?
Relatively calm. We've done some assessments already, no? And we've coordinated with all our team leaders on the ground. So we have 39 barangays. We have alerted our coastal barangays for possible tsunamis. So we've done everything that could be done as to mimic the word of the president, no? But we're on high alert.
The president is right, hindi po ba, Mayor, no, na sabi na nga niya, kapag pupunta halimbawa national officials, siya halimbawa pupunta doon, edi syempre, kumbaga madadivert yung attention, no, and yung energy ng mga tao, mga local officials, right? So it's best that he goes, like, if he can go, then he can go tomorrow or the day after.
Yes, and what we can do and what we've done, because in anticipation of the rainy season, typhoon season, last week or more than a week ago, we inspected our readiness for relief goods operation, and our evacuation centers are full of relief goods ready for distribution. So I've given orders already to distribute wherever they may be needed now.
There are no dead, Mayor Bonito, dyan po sa Vigan, pero meron po kayong mga injured.
There were initially minor injuries, but that was superficial, like nahihilo, nahimatay, ganyan. There was one injury that had to be hospitalized, but otherwise everybody was settled.
Let's talk about the heritage sites, Mayor, the famous Cal Crisologo and also the churches. There's a lot of concern about what happened to them.
Yes, that's what we will be concentrating on, considering that a lot of our structures here had been out of the 18th century, no? And the nice thing, on the contrary, the nice thing about it is they're made of bricks. All our old structure, no? These are considered sometimes sturdier. But when an earthquake like this happens, you can never say, no? That's why we've observed some cracks, hairline cracks, on some of our structures. But otherwise, there were no reports of major the damages that we may consider as condemning that structure.
Mayor Bonito, would you say that what happened this morning reminded us all of July 16, 1990, that earthquake that also hit Luzon, Yun po ba yung pumasok sa isip po ninyo and your constituents?
Yes, what I was most afraid of, there were two major effects of that earthquake before, no? One was the liquefaction that happened. Bigan is an island, and that can happen to us anytime, no? And then, of course, the rising tide. It's always a one. In fact, we were just discussing this also when we discuss about the relief goods, the coming rainy season. I informed not everybody were aware that Bigan is an island and that there's this real danger of liquefaction sometimes.
Mayor Bonito Singson, sir, thank you very much for joining us tonight here on Newsnight.
Thank you, ma'am.
Up next, the government expands the rollout for a second COVID-19 booster to more age groups, while the private sector loses billions of pesos in expired vaccines. Keep it here on Newsnight.
Fried chicken.
Welcome back. Again, our top story, a destructive earthquake rocking Abra province in the Cordillera region and other parts of northern Luzon. The magnitude 7 hit Tayum town before 9 this morning. It was so strong it caused panic and sent people fleeing to safety. The quake damaged houses, buildings, roads, and triggered landslides. National disaster response officials report 4 people were killed. The number is still up for verification. Social Welfare Secretary Erwin Tulfo arrived in Abra this morning to check the situation on the ground. Tulfo says an initial 10 million peso cash aid will be released for distribution to affected residents, while delivery of food for evacuees is ongoing. Centers looking to strengthen disaster resilience and response efforts following the earthquake. Senator J.V. Ejercito says he will again file a bill to create the Department of Disaster Management. Ejercito previously pushed to turn the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, or the NDRRMC, into an entire department dedicated to disaster preparedness and response. But for Senator Amy Marcos, it would be better, she says, to have a separate body under the Office of the President instead. She acknowledges that the NDRRMC is grappling with budget constraints.
Because we are in the Pacific Ring of Fire, so prone tayo sa earthquake, sa volcanic eruption, sa bagyo. Dapat year-round ang rito, ang preparasyon, no? Yung training, yung equipment acquisition, yung paggawa ng mga evacuation centers, kailangan full-time na.
For Senator Robin Padilla, the government should equip regions for disaster response. More age groups can now get their second booster shot for COVID-19. The Health Department has approved the nationwide rollout for those aged 50 and above and for people 18 to 49 years old with underlying illnesses. Only Pfizer and Moderna doses will be given to these age groups. The DOH says eligible individuals only have to present their vaccination card and valid ID. The wider campaign comes as the private sector loses billions of pesos in expired COVID-19 shots. Former presidential advisor for entrepreneurship Joey Concepcion said the vaccines cost 5.1 billion pesos. More students are eager to go back to school after over 2 years of learning from home. AC Nichols reports the Education Department sees millions of enrollees ahead of the full face-to-face classes.
5.6 million learners have registered in public elementary and high schools since enrollment began last Monday. The Education Department says this turnout for the incoming school year has been great so far.
On the first day of enrollment, nakapagtala po tayo ng 3.3 million enrollees. It is a far cry doon sa naitala natin last year, which was only a little bit over 222,000 enrollees.
Deputy officials are reaching out to various agencies and local government units to ensure the safe opening of classes in less than 3 weeks. The planned implementation of full-capacity in-person classes is still a go. However, the DepEd says they are considering particular reasons why certain schools may be allowed to continue with the blended learning setup. One cause of concern is the lack of space or classrooms. Schools with a high number of students have bigger class sizes.
Kung maayos natin kaagad yon, pwede silang magtuloy sa in-person. Kung hindi naman po, sila po yung ma-identify dun sa specific schools that will be allowed to do blended learning.
The DepEd says it is looking into hiring more non-teaching personnel to ease the teachers' workload. Public school teachers have been demanding a pay hike, though DepEd says granting them additional benefits is more doable. In his first State of the Nation address, President Bongbong Marcos urged lawmakers to reinstate mandatory ROTC in senior high school. DepEd says it may take a while before this can be carried out.
The Vice President Secretary feels that we will need to sit down first with, of course, Congress, because this will have to be enacted by law, and also with SHED to discuss the details of that.
Various student groups have opposed the proposal, saying this will only be an added burden amid an education crisis. DepEd, however, believes ROTC is necessary to instill nationalism among young Filipinos. AC Nichols, CNN Philippines.
The Chinese ambassador to the Philippines is all praises for President Marcos's first sauna, especially, the ambassador says, the president's foreign policy pronouncements. China is now looking at 4 possible key areas of cooperation with the Philippines. Tristan Odalo reports.
Without going into details, Chinese Ambassador Wang Zhilian sees no problem on the administration's chosen path on foreign policy, as stated in the just concluded State of the Nation address of President Bongbong Marcos. The Chinese official lauds the president's take on foreign policy and sees opportunity to strengthen ties between the two countries. President Marcos says the country will continue the friend-to-all, enemy-to-none strategy while remaining firm that he will not abandon an inch of Philippine territory to any foreign power.
You know, I'm very impressed when the President Bongbong Marcos talked about independent foreign policy. And you know, we are still studying the speech of the SONA, but I do think that it has sent out a very encouraging, that signals, messages to the people of this country and across the world. We hoped, based on, the policies of the new administration, we will achieve even greater in the next 6 years.
Meantime, the Chinese government is eyeing to work in 4 key areas with the Philippines to bring the nation's bilateral relations into a new level. These areas are agriculture, infrastructure, energy, and cultural and people exchange. Beijing previously said that it is ready to open its doors to more Philippine agricultural products and make additional investments in the country. In terms of infrastructure, 17 projects have been completed under the Build, Build, Build program of the Duterte administration, and 20 big projects are in the works. The Chinese government says they wish to resume talks in major railway projects and joint and oil gas discussions which were terminated during the previous administration. China also commits to support the Philippines in its transition towards clean and renewable energy.
Last year, the export of electric vehicle of China accounts for more than half of the world. We are one of the leading players in terms of clean energy. So we are ready to work with this country, to share our technology, share our expertise with this country.
No date yet on the possible state visit of President Marcos to China, but an invitation has been made by Chinese President Xi Jinping through the visits of key Beijing officials in Manila. Tristan Udalo, CNN Philippines.
In other news, the remains of the victims who were gunned down during the Ateneo shooting Sunday will be brought to their respective hometowns for burial. One of the casualties includes a security guard, Genevieve Bandiala, whose death caused an outpouring of grief in Ateneo. Chrissy Di Matulak has that story.
Cristina Mascardo, the partner of slain Ateneo security guard Genevieve Bandiala, got emotional as she recalled their last moments together. Mascardo, who also works as a security guard for another agency, said she was in disbelief when she received the call from Bandiala's superior.
Hindi po, nabigla po talaga ako na ganun yung
Occidental, Bitan Mayor Rose Furicay and her executive assistant Victor Capistrano will be brought home to Lamitan, Basilan next week. The shooting took place just before the graduation ceremony of the Ateneo Law School at the university's campus in Katipunan, Quezon City. Furicay's daughter Hannah, who was one of the graduates, was also shot. According to her father, Mayor Oric Furicay, Hannah was supposed to receive honors in the ceremony, the culmination of her hard work. The mayor says Hannah is now in stable condition but still needs medical attention.
Worried kami ng konti dahil she's out of danger already, but mayroon pang isang surgery gagawin sa kanya.
In the meantime, the university has extended its support to Bandiala's family through a donation drive. Mascardo says the family is grateful to the community Bandiala has selflessly served.
taos puso po akong nagpapasalamat sa kanila dahil nandyan po sila para sa amin, sumusuporta. Buong puso ko pong tinatanggap yun.
Responding to supporters of Dr. Chow Chow Yumol, the identified gunman, Mayor Furicay says he respects their sentiments and that the family will just let the legal system take its course. Chrissy Di Matulak, CNN Philippines.
Newsnight will be back with more stories. Drag Race fans, start your engines. The 12 queens competing in the Philippines series have been revealed. And for the first time, a K-pop solo act is nominated for an MTV Video Music Award. Stay tuned to CNN Philippines. Welcome back. In entertainment, congratulations to these queens who will grace the first season of Drag Race Philippines. The cast for the much-awaited local version of RuPaul's Drag Race was officially unveiled today. Get to know the 12 contestants with the show premiering on August 17th and the Untucked segment on the 19th. Actor Paolo Ballesteros will host the show. American drag performer Jiggly Caliente and Filipina impersonator Khaled Karen are also on board. Milestone for Lisa Blackpink, as she is now the first K-pop soloist to get a VMA nod. She joins the likes of BTS and 17 in the Best K-pop category. And that is it for now. Join me again on News.ph at 7 p.m. and on Politics as usual at 8. I'm Pio Ontiveros for Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines.
This
We all experience stomach aches from time to time. The Department of Health reported that gastrointestinal-related issues like hyperacidity, even ulcers, as well as food poisoning and diarrhea is quite common among Filipinos. Sometimes these conditions are easy to remedy, but there are instances where they could indicate something more serious. On the program today, we'll talk about the most common gastrointestinal-related conditions, what signs to watch out for, and easy changes that you can make to care for your digestive system. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and welcome to MedTalk Health Talk on CNN Philippines. Our guests are here today to tell us more about the complexity of our gastrointestinal system. With us is Dr. Eva Irene U. Maglonzo. She's a family medicine specialist and past president of the Philippine Academy of Family Physicians. We're also joined by Dr. Luis Abola. He's a gastroenterologist and the section chief of gastroenterology of the UERM Memorial and Medical Center. Thank you for joining us on the program today. Now, Dr. Irene, when it comes to our gastrointestinal system, ang karaniwan complaint ng isang pasyente na pupunta sa iyo ay sasabihin nilang masakit ang kanilang tiyan. When it comes to this very common complaint, gaano kadaming pwedeng mangyari dahil sumasakit ang tiyan ng isang tao?
Yes, there can be a lot of things which can happen to a patient when they have abdominal pain. So, the most common is the epigastric pain, meaning nandito sa may sikmura. So kapag merong ganyan, things that you will have to look out for is the character of the pain. So if the character of the pain seems like heartburn, then there's also a lot of disease entities that can happen.
Maraming talagang pwedeng cause ng problema ng isang simpleng masakit ang isang tiyan. But I'd like to talk to Dr. Luis first when it comes to acid-related diseases. Let's first talk about acid. Why does our body have such strong acid, and what is the purpose of this very strong acid?
So the acid is produced by our stomach cells. Of course, it helps in digestion. At the same time, also sterilize the food that we eat. That is the basic function of the acid. Prepares the food for digestion and also cleans the food.
Now let's talk about when someone feels symptoms of hyperacidity. Let's start with that, Dr. Luis. What happens? What are the causes why someone would produce more acid than what is needed?
There really is no explanation. Some people produce the same amount of acid, but they develop symptoms. It can be because there is injury already to the stomach lining. In fact, our stomach lining is supposed to be protected against acid. It's only when there's injury, such as if you take pain relievers, if you have an infection with the bacteria, smokers, if you have reflux, the esophagus is not protected against acid, you will develop symptoms.
So let's talk about those symptoms with Dr. Irene. Napaka-importante yun because certain conditions like indigestion or empacho for that matter or some heartburn, you mentioned earlier, can mimic that of a heart attack, which is very, very serious. Could you describe what a person with heartburn or isang taong may empacho, what do they feel like na feeling nila heart attack?
A person with indigestion or empacho has heartburn. Initially, it's yung sasabihin nila, ang common complaint in the clinic is mahapde, mainit. No? However, if it turned out to be a reflux, there will be chest pain also. That is why it is confused with a heart attack, like what we call in the medical parlance, such as angina. No, so angina, if you have that, that's a risk for heart attack.
And as a reminder to our viewers, in case you do feel any of these symptoms of chest pain or that of a burning sensation on your chest and think you have a heart attack, it is best to go to the emergency room right away and not think about it might anything less than that. Now, Dr. Luis, let's talk about kapag naging mas chronic or mas tumatagal and nagkaroon na ito ng reflux disease. Could you talk a little bit more about that? What are some of the symptoms that a patient with gastroesophageal reflux disease might experience?
As mentioned, heartburn is the primary symptom. Heartburn is a burning sensation near the heart. That's why it's called the heartburn. But some people may even experience extra GI manifestations such as chronic cough, those who have asthma. Then, of course, there will be heartburn, especially after eating. And usually it wakes them up early in the morning, the sensation of heartburn, and also they can experience acid going up or the food that they've just eaten going up into their mouth.
Now, Dr. Luis, a lot of our viewers pretty much associate this hyperacidity with the diet that they eat. Now, is diet closely related, strongly related to the symptoms of hyperacidity, heartburn?
In my practice, what I tell my patients is to find out what are the food or beverages that trigger their symptoms. I also instruct them to eat too fast, not to overeat. Sometimes when you overeat, you have a tendency of distending your stomach, and so your risk of fluxing is high. And of course, avoid reclining or lying down immediately after eating. There's no hard and fast rule now about the diet.
Now, Dr. Irene, another condition na common din sa mga Pilipinos ay ang tinatawag na bloatedness. Please describe to us kung ano ang pakiramdam ng isang taong bloated at bakit nila nararamdaman ito.
So bloatedness is caused by gas, and usually it's caused by overeating also. So that's why there's gas in the stomach.
We just covered a lot of really common gastro-related diseases in the last few minutes, but there's so much more. When we return, we'll talk about food poisoning and what to do in case you have diarrhea. So keep it here on Med Talk Health Talk. We'll be right back. Earlier, we discussed hyperacidity, acid reflux, as well as being bloated. But now let's discuss another gastrointestinal condition related to those we mentioned earlier, and that is ulcers. Now, there are many types of ulcers, not just one. So it's best to be able to talk about that with the experts in order to pinpoint the symptoms for you to get proper treatment. Now, Dr. Luis, let's talk about ulcers. A lot of people associate ulcers with that of prolonged hyperacidity. Is that the only reason why someone may have an ulcer?
Ulcers, the most common cause of ulcers is still an infection with Helicobacter pylori, as well as smoking. These are the risk factors for the development of ulcers.
Earlier, we talked about how extensive the gastrointestinal system encompasses. Does it matter? Does it feel any different? Depende kung nasaan located ang ulcer.
In general, it's very difficult to differentiate where the ulcers are based on the symptoms. But the classical duodenal ulcer, or the ulcer in the duodenum, is pain just before eating, and which is relieved by eating. But then the pain recurs several hours after eating. And also it wakes the patients up around 4 to 5 in the morning, early morning, because of severe pain. For gastric ulcers, It mostly patients will experience, they can be asymptomatic, that means there's no symptoms, but they can also have symptoms that are precipitated by eating or aggravated by eating.
Now, Dr. Irene, I'd like to talk to you about some of the treatment options when it comes to hyperacidity, ulcers, maraming different na gamot. Merong mga PPIs, proton pump inhibitors, meron mga antacids. What are some of the more common ones used? And what is the goal?
Yes, they can be given, but we don't want our patients to self-medicate with that. No? So ask the physicians who will recommend when to use these antacids or this proton pump inhibitor. They are being used because they are helpful in alleviating the acid in the stomach.
Dr. Irene, pag-usapan natin yung food poisoning. Let's talk about the symptoms and what is very prevalent about food poisoning that may prompt a doctor to think that this is definitely something ingested at naging food poisoning.
The most common symptoms will be your diarrhea, then others will have vomiting and also abdominal pain, and even fever can be present in that. But it is also very important to ask in the history whether these patients really have shared food eaten, and if there are a lot of people who ate that particular food who had the same symptoms.
Now, Dr. Irene, when it comes to food poisoning, kailangan bang nasa hospital na kagad or is something that can be monitored at home?
If really there is persistent diarrhea, vomiting, it's really better that patients be brought to the emergency room so that they come after a while.
The best notion here is to seek consult right away for your condition, case any of these symptoms do occur. Now, Dr. Irene, let's talk about diarrhea. Very common, not just with adults, but lalo na pag children. What should parents do kapag yung anak nila ay merong loose bowels? Let's describe what loose bowels really are.
So loose bowels, usually they already have watery stools, and if ever there is concomitant vomiting and also fever and signs of dehydration, then the child must be brought for consult in the hospital.
Are there any signs that should immediately prompt a person to go to a hospital, or should they wait a few days muna, see if this will go away, or dapat magpatingin na kagad sa doktor?
So even if there are no signs of dehydration yet, it is better that they are seen by a physician even on an outpatient basis, because diarrhea can either be viral, bacterial, or any other causes, so that they can be diagnosed for them. However, the flags, the red flags, like for example, they have signs of dehydration, will include some weakness. Then also they look at the eyes, if there are sunken eyeballs, or the tongue, if the mucosa is not moist anymore. So those signs will prompt for an emergency room consult.
Pag dehydration, Dr. Irene, anong magandang fluid replacement dito? Sports drink, regular water, or what is your best recommendation?
So we recommend the oral rehydration solution because it contains the different electrolytes needed by the body, because you lose that when you have diarrhea. Now for the sports drink, a lot of people are using that, but sometimes they have high potassium content. So that's the problem with sports drink. If they overdo it, then we can have problems with potassium.
High potassium and high sugar as well. And as advice to our viewers, when it comes to replacing your fluids orally, if you do have diarrhea, is to take frequent sips of water instead of big gulps of fluid at a time. As with most conditions, prevention is always the best practice here. When we return, steps you can take to prevent gastrointestinal conditions. Your health is our mission here on Med Talk Health Talk. Dr. Freddy Gomez, and welcome back to Med Talk Health Talk. Now, there are many reasons you might be dealing with a gastrointestinal related condition. You might be lacking fiber in your diet, or your genes might leave you at risk for developing certain conditions. But whatever the cause, there are steps that you can take in order to manage this disorder. Now, Dr. Luis, earlier we've been talking about hyperacidity. We've been talking about several factors with relation to our intestines and to our stomach as well. Now, the bottom line a lot of people are concerned with is that of the development of malignancy or cancer. Can any of these conditions that we mentioned today, can any of these eventually lead to a malignancy if not given attention?
Patients with gastric ulcers particularly, we have to watch out because a gastric ulcer can even, in fact, be an early manifestation of a gastric cancer. So patients with gastric ulcer, normally what we do is to repeat the endoscopy 4 to 8 weeks later to see that it should heal. And even the first endoscopy, we do a biopsy to make sure that there are no malignant cells in the ulcers. But duodenal ulcers will not be a pre-malignant condition. We are particularly careful with gastric ulcers, especially if it is a solitary gastric ulcer.
You talked about the duodenum, which is part of the small, the large intestine, including the colon. Are any of these at risk as well for malignancies if we don't get any tests beforehand to sort of spot them early?
Of course, what we are advocating in the society, the Philippine Society of Gastroenterology, is a screening for colon cancer because colon cancer is increasing in the Philippines. So we recommend for everybody over 50 to undergo colonoscopy almost every 5 years or depending on the situation. If you have a family history, you have to undergo screening. And if not colonoscopy, you can also undergo a stool exam to detect the presence of occult blood.
If colon cancer, Dr. Luis, is spotted early, what is the prognosis? Anong itsura nito?
Well, sometimes we spot them at the polyp stage. So we're able to remove the polyp or the small lesion and they have a very good prognosis, but they have to undergo further surveillance. Of course, chemotherapy may be required. So it is a multidisciplinary work with the surgeon, the GI, and the oncologist on board.
In other words, the best time to spot a colon cancer is when it is early. Now, my question, Dr. Luis, kapag early pa ang colon cancer, may mararamdaman ba ang isang tao that will prompt him to have an exam?
Well, bleeding, that's one of the red flags we call. If there's any form of bleeding in your stool, see your doctor. If you notice a change in the appearance of your stool, the caliber becomes pencil thin-like or what we call goat stool-like, or if your bowel habit changes, alternating diarrhea and constipation, unexplained weight loss, these are the signs that we should watch out for.
Now, Dr. Irene, pag-usapan naman natin, ang paborito namin dito sa MedTalk Health Talk ay ang diet. What is right to eat?
So for good gut health, it is important to know the food which may not actually cause reflux. Like for example, your turmeric. And also, they say lemon juice is acidic, but when you mix lemon juice with water, it will have an alkalinizing effect and thus prevent reflux also. Then even some yogurt that is not too sour. Now, we want to eat healthy, fresh fruits and vegetables. Another important thing that should be eaten will be the fibrous foods. No? So yung mga whole grain cereals. Why is fiber important? Because if you eat fiber, it makes you feel full. No? So that is less likely to cause overeating. Because overeating can precipitate also your heartburn or even your reflux.
Ang uso ngayon na buzzword is probiotics. How does this affect the gastrointestinal system? At kailangan bang bumili ng mga gamot na may probiotics? Or can we see this naturally in a good, healthy diet?
Yes, probiotics, you can find it in yogurt. Now, there are already some studies on the use of probiotics relating it to decreasing the incidence of reflux also. No? So if you can get it from the natural food, it can be done also.
Now, Dr. Luis, ang madalas na tanong sa MedTalk Health Talk ay, ang pagkain ba ng mga barbecue or yung mga sunog na parte ng mga pagkain, is this precancerous?
Yes, if you talk to oncologists, they will not recommend eating processed food. No? tapos yung mga sunog, yung barbecue, be very careful not to eat it every day.
We learned a lot definitely on how to keep our gut healthy. But before we go, of course, we have to get your advice and your tips. I'll start first with Dr. Irene. Do you have any advice for the viewers, especially when it comes to taking care of our gut?
So for the tips on trying to take care for our gut, so I would suggest the ABCDE. A is you avoid yung mga artificial sweeteners, processed food, those which are high in fat, and skipping meals. Then letter B, the bad habits should be avoided, like for example, smoking, excessive alcohol drinking, excessive caffeine. And letter C, consult a physician regularly and cope with stress. And D, drink plenty of water. And E, exercise regularly and eat fresh fruits and vegetables.
A, B, C, D, and E. Very good advice. And of course, Dr. Luis, before we go, what's your advice?
The advice is if you are 50 and above, see your gastroenterologist so that you can undergo screening for colon cancer. It has been proven to prevent or mitigate the effects of colon cancer. Secondly is, as mentioned, eat healthy, avoid smoking, moderate in alcohol intake. And that's all.
We definitely learned a lot from both our guests, and I'd like to thank Dr. Irene Yu Maglonzo for joining us, and of course, Dr. Luis Abola for sharing your insights and giving us a better explanation on how to keep our gut healthy. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and thank you for watching MedTalk Health Talk. We'll see you again next time.